everyone. This is Ellen Avery, the medical advisor for the Ketogenic Diet with Nutricia. Thank you all for joining us today for our webinar, Food Allergies and the Blenderized Diet in Medical Ketogenic Diet Patients. Before we begin our webinar, I'd like to give you a little background on Keto University. Keto University began as a 3-day live conference. Given the circumstances, we have transitioned it into a series of webinar events. These webinars are given by a panel of experts in the medical ketogenic diet and vary in topic. All of them are geared around the medical ketogenic diet for epilepsy and provide information from ketones to cooking, from vitamin and mineral supplementation to the fundamentals of the diet. We are on our 8th topic now, and we are very excited to be bringing all of these webinars to you throughout our Keto University series. We have 3 different speakers today, and I would like to introduce them to you. Lindsay Thompson is one of our keto ambassadors who finished her PhD last year in medical nutrition science from the University of Kansas Medical Center. She works at a large children's hospital in the Midwest where she follows over 120 patients on the medical ketogenic diet. She's been a dietitian for more than 13 years and has multiple poster presentations and articles that have been published about the ketogenic diet. Second will be Jessica Brown speaking, who is a dietitian joining us from California. She has been a dietitian for approximately 13 years as well. She has extensive experience with feeding disorders, including multiple publications on this topic, as well as blenderized diets. She also works with patients and has presented posters for patients on the medical ketogenic diet, where she follows approximately 60 to 70 patients. And she has been a great asset for this presentation. And finally, joining us from South Carolina, we have Laura Doherty. She is the primary dietitian for 1 main clinic and 2 telehealth clinics throughout the state of South Carolina, where she follows approximately 170 patients on the medical ketogenic diet. She has been a registered dietitian for 14 years and is the president and founding member of the Keto Hope Foundation. She has given numerous presentations and has also published on the medical ketogenic diet. We are very happy to have all 3 of these speakers here with us today. Now, throughout the webinar, you'll notice that there is a Q&A box on the right-hand side of the screen. If you have any questions during the presentation for any of our presenters, please feel free to put your questions in that Q&A box. If you have a specific question for one of the presenters, please put their name in that box and we'll make sure that we get that question answered. And now, without any further ado, I would like to pass the controls to Lindsay, who will get this presentation started for us.
Thank you, Ellen. So these are our disclosures for all 3 speakers. And today, these are our objectives. So we'd like to outline ways to implement a medical ketogenic diet for patients with food allergies or other dietary restrictions, generate blenderized recipes for patients with food allergies or that are following a vegan or vegetarian diet, develop ketogenic blenderized recipes utilizing specialized commercial products, and then integrate superfoods into a blenderized diet. So I'm going to start with talking about mainly food allergies. I'm going to talk about a little bit of blenderized diet, but that'll be the primary focus of Jessica and Laura's section, so I won't get too much into that area. So in starting with food allergies, I wanted to just talk about some general things that I like to do when I first meet with a patient that's referred to me for a ketogenic diet that has food allergies. So the first thing I like to do is I like to confirm the allergies that they have. So often we can all recall a patient that maybe has had a milk protein allergy listed in their chart, but then when we do some further investigation, you know, it may be more of a lactose intolerance that wouldn't be as much of a problem on a ketogenic diet, or maybe it was a previous allergy that isn't current. So really just going through their medical history and allergies and making sure that all the allergies that you are aware of are actually current, have been confirmed, and that you need to move forward with continuing to avoid all of those foods. And then having a conversation with the family before you start keto about the limitations in variety that may result from their food allergies in combination with going on a ketogenic diet. So the more allergies they have, obviously the more restrictive the diet is going to become in terms of variety. And so I like to have that conversation beforehand so the family, so it's a fully transparent conversation and the family knows what we're doing moving forward. We all have those patients that, you know, variety is not an issue. They'll eat the same three meals every day anyway. So that may not be an issue for some patients, but for others it may be an issue. So just having that conversation beforehand. And then really, you know, we have lots of diets that are available to us now that can get a patient either into ketosis or have the seizure control desired from a ketogenic diet. So really considering the types of allergies they have and then what diet is going to be the best for them. So whether it's modified Atkins versus low glycemic index, classic keto, MCT oil, depending on that individual presentation, one diet may fit better than another. And there was actually an article that just came out this week that showed equal efficacy. It was in JAMA Pediatrics this week, showing equal efficacy between the MCT oil diet, modified Atkins, and classic keto. So we do know that they work. And so just finding the right match for your patient is going to be important. So first I'll talk about just some common food allergies that a patient may have and how that would affect an oral fed patient on a ketogenic diet, and then I'll move to more specifically to a tube fed patient. So one of the most common food allergies we see is milk, protein, or dairy allergy. And again, we want to just confirm that this is still active and current. So often this is diagnosed in infancy, and it may be something that, you know, in toddlerhood the child can tolerate some milk, protein, or dairy. So just confirming, I like to do that before I start the diet if I can, to try to challenge the patient to see if they do indeed still have that milk protein allergy. We obviously also have patients that have a true allergy that may be more lifelong. So in that case, you know, really with a ketogenic diet, the classic diet, milk, protein, or dairy is really a vehicle for fat in those menus. And so we all know we use a lot of heavy cream as a milk replacement for the classic keto. And so the challenge is really finding a way to get all of the fat into the patient without dairy. And so one of the things that's fairly straightforward to use is unsweetened coconut milk in place of heavy cream. You may want to use some emulsified MCT oil like Liquigen to get the fat up a little higher in that replacement. We can also use oils instead of a dairy or a cream. The challenge here is that it makes the meals liquefied very quickly if you add a lot of oil to them, and then it becomes unpalatable. So this is an option I like to use with a patient that might have a G-tube for like hydration or medications, because you can administer the oil through their G-tube and then still allow them to eat a fairly palatable meal. Ghee is an option, so clarified butter where we've removed the milk protein component of that. We can also use avocado, which is nice because it's a solid fat, so it doesn't act to kind of liquefy the meal like I was talking about with the oils. And then just considering a lower ratio with some MCT oil added. So in terms of kind of liberalizing what they are eating with less fat, but then adding some MCT to get the ketones to a level that is acceptable for the patient would also be an option. And then we also have, I included soy protein and gluten because these are common allergies that the patient may have. They're not as much of a challenge on a ketogenic type of diet. Soy protein does often come along with a milk protein allergy, so we want to make sure to note that. And then a lot of our soy protein options also have a lot of carbohydrates, so they sometimes aren't even an option on a ketogenic diet. In terms of gluten, again, this isn't usually an issue. In fact, the classic ketogenic diet is primarily gluten-free, depending on what choices you include. But it is important to watch the supplements that you offer these patients, and then also condiments that might be added that maybe you consider a free food that you're not incorporating into their ratio, but may be gluten containing. And then a lot of patients, just clinically, we notice that they may do better from a GI perspective when they get on a keto diet, and perhaps they have an underlying gluten intolerance that it benefits just from kind of the removal of gluten as we move to more of a ketogenic type of diet. Eggs and nuts are a couple of other allergies that can be problematic with keto. Eggs are there's kind of a twofold issue. One is we use those a lot with our breakfast options because we're taking out all of kind of our more carb options. But you do still have some options with breakfast. There's a lot of different pancake options that are using nut flours if they don't have a nut allergy. You can do a smoothie. You can do kind of nut-based oatmeal, so using like an almond flour and then some actual nuts to make like a oatmeal replacement. And then the second issue with eggs is baking. So if you have some baked goods that you would usually use an egg, and we're using that usually a lot because we're trying to replace the flours and the carb-containing components of a recipe. There are some keto-friendly egg replacers that I listed here, so we can use things like flaxseed meal, almond butter, or other nut butters if they don't have, a nut allergy. If they do, you could use some sunflower seed butter. Chia seed is an option, and that gels up when you mix with water. And then coconut milk is a good replacement for an egg in more of a baking type of recipe. And then in terms of nuts, there's a couple of issues here with nuts. One is the patient themselves that might have a nut allergy, but then also a lot of the schools that patients attend are nut-free. So often we have patients that can eat nuts at home, but then can't at school. And so thinking through some of the recipes that they may not be able to take to school, and those are sometimes the things like almond crackers or something that they are easy to transport. So important to think through that. We need to avoid the nut flours. Usually coconut flour is okay to continue. We can use flaxseed meal instead of a nut flour. And then there's a couple recipes I listed here that are available on Keto Diet Calculator that are nut-free. The Oopsie rolls and high fiber rolls would be a couple of nut-free options there. And then I know our next webinar in the Nutritia series is my colleague Rachel Finn, who's a chef educator at our center, and she'll be going through some recipes as well during that that can be helpful here. So next I'm going to talk about tube-fed patients in particular and food allergies in the context of keto. So often food allergies are concomitant with GI complications. So whether it's the kind of medical complexity of the patient or their genetic condition, maybe that is the reason for their epilepsy diagnosis, we just often see that these patients are very, very complex. They have food allergies, they have reflux, vomiting. It seems to kind of all come together. So what I really like to do with these patients is talk to the families about their baseline formula and feeding regimen, and really try to maintain the things that are working for them as I move towards a ketogenic diet. So trying not to rock the boat if things are working well for them. And I have an example of a case study where I did this in a couple of slides that I can share with you. So in terms of formula options for our patients that are tube-fed with food allergies, we have a lot of formula options nowadays. So when I first started doing keto 12 years ago, we had 2 formula options, and it got a little sticky at times. So now we have more formulas. We also have a lot more experienced dietitians. So we have a lot more people that have been doing this for 10 or 20 years that have been willing with that experience on their side to try new things, and we now know we can do certain things like blended diet in keto patients. So we have milk-based formulas that are available for those patients that don't have a milk allergy. We have a soy-based formula, RCF, that can be used if the patient does have a milk allergy but not a soy allergy. It needs to be mixed with modulars. It's a 2-to-1 at its base, but it can be mixed with modulars to create the ratio desired. And then for a patient that requires an amino acid-based formula, we can build one of those from scratch using complete amino acid mix, a fat modular and a carbohydrate modular, which I have an example of that in my case study I can share with you. We have a couple of peptide formula options. Keto V peptide is a hydrolyzed formula that could be used. And then we also have a keto peptide kind of meal replacement. So it's more of a blended commercial formula that could be used. So it's kind of between those peptide formula and blended diet options. And it has hydrolyzed pea protein as the protein base. And then we also have blended diet that in terms of using recipes from foods that the family would blend at home. And that will be a lot of our presentation today will be these types of recipes in which you can really individualize the recipe for the patient and remove the foods that would contain allergens for that particular patient. So now I'm going to go through a case study of a patient of mine I had quite a while ago. This was a 2-year-old little girl with a history of intractable epilepsy of unknown etiology. She came to us with a confirmed milk protein allergy. In her baseline feeding regimen, she was on an amino acid-based formula, Neocate. She was receiving 160 mils of 30 calorie per ounce Neocate Junior 5 times a day with a 15 mil water flush via her G-tube. It was run over 1 hour. The family would increase the length of the feeding if the patient had retching, which she did have some of that. She also had some intermittent vomiting about 1 time per week at baseline. She was on reflux medications and had no history of fundoplication, and her growth was within normal limits. So again, when I saw this patient, because she was tolerating this regimen fairly well, I tried to maintain as many aspects of this as I could as I moved her to a ketogenic diet. So we admitted her to the hospital to initiate the diet. A few things that we did with this patient, we started more conservatively than usual given the history of vomiting. And we started her at a 1-to-1. We usually start our tube-fed patients at a 2-to-1 on the first day. And then we advanced her over 4 days to 3.25-to-1 with adequate ketosis during that initiation. Like I mentioned, I continued the same feeding regimen that they were doing at home, so the 160 mils of formula 5 times per day. And you can see below there the recipe that I used. So I maintained some Neocate Junior in her recipe since that was her baseline formula. I added some complete amino acid mix, some emulsified MCT oil, and some microlipids. So it is important when you build these modular formulas to have an emulsifier in there so that everything stays in solution a little bit better. And I mixed this to 30 calories per ounce, and it was 27% MCT, which is similar to what Neocate Junior is at baseline. So I maintained around the same level of MCT just for tolerance reasons. And then I pointed out here that it's important to remember vitamins and minerals. So if you are building a formula from scratch, which you often have to do with these patients with allergies, just remember that you're not using a complete formula that has all the micronutrients that they need. So make sure you use whatever program you like to use for this, but ensuring that they're receiving adequate micronutrients. And I do have in a couple of slides a list of supplements that are specifically allergen-free. So just for some follow-up on this patient, she came back a month after diet initiation. The parents were still reporting some intermittent vomiting. It was a little bit increased from baseline. When we looked at her BMP, she was acidotic with a CO2 of 16. So our intervention at this time was to decrease her ratio a little bit and increase her bicarbonate supplement that she was receiving. When she returned to the clinic at 3 months, the parents were still reporting some vomiting about the same amount. Her BMP revealed she was no longer acidotic, and the family was interested in trialing some blended feeds, which we were willing to try given the vomiting. And so the recipe that was given to them is on the right side of your slide there. a mixture. We started with like a baby food blend that could be a little bit more straightforward than actually using a blender with them, and just to kind of start and trial a blended diet since they had never done it before. So we did that for 2 of the 5 feeds. The benefit to this was that it decreased the volume of the feedings from 160 to 90 mLs each, and so this assisted with some of the vomiting that she was having. So this would be another option for a patient with food allergies that also had some GI-related complications. And this next slide shows, Jessica, Laura, and I worked to create a Blenderized diet booklet that will be available through Nutritia, and this is one of the recipes that I used was from this patient that I had created a multiple food allergy blend for. So this is just a screenshot from the booklet that we created. There's a twofold benefit to this recipe. It doesn't require a blender is the first one, so it can be shaken, which is helpful for some families, and then it also is free of the common food allergens that are listed there. So there's a recipe for a 4-to-1, 3-to-1, and 2-to-1, and each of these make 500 calories for the patient. And then lastly, I just wanted to list here, this is by no means a comprehensive list, but these are some of the allergy-friendly supplements that are available. These are more of our multivitamin type of products. NanoVM Kirkman Products has a hypoallergenic line, FruityVits and FlexiVits. And I like NanoVM, FruityVits, and FlexiVits are all powders, and I like that when we're building a modular formula because sometimes you don't need all of the micronutrients supplemented, so you can do 1 or 2 grams of these products instead of the full recommended amount and get your patient exactly where they need to be in terms of their micronutrients. So just kind of a reminder to be sure to look at that if you are building recipes from scratch or doing a blended, and this is also applicable to our PO allergy diets. So now I'm going to move over to Jessica, who's going to talk about the Blenderized keto diet.
All right, thank you, Lindsay. So I'm sure many of us have recognized that more and more families are requesting Blenderized ketogenic diets. And one of the most perceived benefits that I see is that you can really individualize these recipes for these children. It allows parents to play a more active role in their child's therapy. For example, I've had parents request adding kimchi or breast milk or bone broth to their child's Blenderized feeds. I also see that families seem to be requesting a more whole foods approach to their child's therapy, often saying they want ingredients that they can actually pronounce on a label. And as Lindsay stated earlier, using amino acid-based formulas is an option for children with food allergies, especially dairy and soy, but Blenderized diets can also be an alternative as well. There is increasing research using Blenderized diets for children with feeding intolerance, whether it be constipation, vomiting, reflux. And although this research is based on G-tube-dependent patients not on a ketogenic diet, in our practice, clinically, we actually see these same results. When children have intolerance on a ketogenic diet, we put them on a ketogenic blend, we are seeing improvements in their with their GI intolerance. Families often tell me too, they don't want to provide the same thing to their children every day. They don't eat the same thing every day, so they don't want to do that for their children. And so a Blenderized diet really allows them to increase the variety that they're providing. And as a dietitian, my goal is to increase variety as well. There's emerging research showing that increasing diet diversity really has favorable outcomes on the gut microbiome. And then allowing families to provide that love and nurture. Just last week, I had a parent share with me that she was most excited about transitioning to a ketogenic blend so that she can blend a keto cupcake for her son on his birthday. So the avocado, as ketogenic dietitians, we love the avocado, right? Well, at the very least, we respect it. It's naturally a 4-to-1 ketogenic ratio, super nutrient dense. It has over 20 vitamins, minerals, and phytonutrients. So it really is the perfect transition to introduce blends to a family. I've learned this tip from Laura, is that if you have a family that's interested in blends, maybe they're a little apprehensive, they just want to dip their toe in the water, that they can start blending a little bit of avocado. It creates a more thicker formula, and they can practice on their child. Can their child tolerate a thicker feed? Maybe they were on a drip feed, and so they need to practice doing syringe boluses. Maybe some families want to provide whole foods, but they're concerned they don't really have the resources or time. So maybe they're just adding avocado and they're not transitioning to other foods, but they are then providing some whole foods for their child. This can also be used for some patients that, I know many of us dietitians use this for our patients that are having difficult bowel movements. So you might add some avocado to their blend to help with some regularity as well. So let's talk about putting this into practice. So around 30 grams of avocado is equivalent to about 1 ounce or 2 tablespoons. You might be in a situation where your family doesn't have a gram scale because they've never needed one. They've been on formula, liquid formula. And so instead of waiting until they come to your clinic and you provide them a scale or teach them how to use the scale, they can use household measures to start implementing this at home. 30 grams of avocado is about 50 calories. And actually, if we subtract the fiber calories, it's very close, conveniently, to our standard ketogenic formulas of 45 calories per ounce. So it makes a really nice transition for dietitians to implement this without all of that work of developing multiple recipes for the families to decide this isn't for them. So in this example, we have a child that's on a standard 4-to-1 ketogenic formula, 45 cal per ounce, and they're on 8 ounces 4 times a day. So to introduce this Blenderized plan using avocado, we would add 1 ounce of avocado to each feeding and then reduce the ketogenic formula to 7 ounces. So they're still getting the same volume, they're still getting the same ratio, and they're giving very comparable calories and macronutrients as our previous regimen. So similarly, another stepwise approach to initiating blends is using that ketogenic commercial formula as the base. So you can have families start with adding 1 to 2 foods at a time to the formula until they get comfortable and confident, and over time they can increase the amount of real food while decreasing the amount of the ketogenic formula. Or maybe you have them start with 1 Blenderized 2 feeding out of, say they get 4 feedings, you start with 1 as a whole food blend and the remainder 3 feeds as formula. And over time you transition and increase the frequency of the Blenderized feeds. This also ensures that you're providing a source of vitamins and minerals. We know as ketogenic dietitians that the amount of real food that children get on this diet is minimal. And so once they transition from a fortified formula to complete blends, you have to add a comprehensive multivitamin supplement. This also allows feasibility in a hospital setting. So every institution is different in what they allow. Maybe at your institution, families have to bring in their ketogenic blends from home. I'm fortunate enough that our nutrition lab will blend a ketogenic recipe for us, but I want it to make it feasible. So I do have families agree to using a ketogenic standardized formula and then adding some real food that we carry in our hospital. So it's not 5 o'clock on a Friday and the dietitian or the diet technician is running out to the grocery store to get whatever specialized nut milk or product that they're on. It could also provide a potential cost saving to the family. So it might be overwhelming for some families that have received insurance coverage for their formula for an extended period of time to then think about completely transitioning to blends and having to purchase and all that ingredients and recipes for their children. And so by providing the formula as a base, it provides them that slow transition to see, can this be something that the family is able to implement? So here we have a case study to illustrate using commercial ketogenic products with Blenderized feeds. We have a 13-year-old male with Lennox-Gastaut syndrome. At baseline, he's having 5 to 7 seizures per day. He's maximized on 3 seizure medications and has a history of 3 additional. For nutrition, he doesn't do any oral feeds, G-tube dependent. He's currently receiving 45 calories per ounce of formula, and he has an extensive history of GI intolerance. Vomiting, retching, constipation, reflux, and you can see there he is managed on multiple GI medications to help with a stool softener, PPI, and a prokinetic. So in our institution, we admit our patients to the hospital for initiation. And on day one, we start at 100% of calories, goal calories, and start at a 1-to-1 ratio and transition each day, depending on ketosis. So we admitted this kid, started at a 1-to-1 ratio, and advanced him up to a 3-to-1 ratio. He was on a standard ketogenic formula with added protein powder and to meet his protein needs. And you can see that he had very good ketosis on a 3-to-1. His beta hydroxybutyrate was 44 milligrams per deciliter. And with our initiation process, I also like to keep everything consistent in terms of the formula concentration, the feeding volume, and the feeding rate to really minimize any additional variables that may occur during the initiation process. So this patient, 1 week after discharge, was actually admitted to our hospital with vomiting and dehydration. So at that point in time, I decreased the formula concentration to 30 calories per ounce, seeing can I establish feeding tolerance. We did get a GI consult during that admission. He had an upper endoscopy in page Bravo, and they found that he had erosive esophagitis. He was already maximized on his GI medications, and so at that point in time, they decided to schedule him for a fundal application. He came to us for his scheduled 1-month follow-up, and you can see he was actually doing really well in terms of his seizure control on the diet. He had reduction to 2 to 4 seizures per day. However, he still persisted with vomiting. So as a team, we discussed, let's see if we can still maintain seizure control. Let's reduce the ratio to see if that helps establish his feeding tolerance. And let's start experimenting with adding some blenderized foods. We have seen this clinically in our clinic in the past be really successful with adding whole foods to the ketogenic regimen. Also of note here, his free carnitine was low, so we did add a carnitine supplementation. So this family, it was a single caregiver, Spanish speaking, and they were in a transitional living situation with very limited resources. So I really wanted to make this a feasible recipe for them to implement. So you can see here, this plan didn't require any weighing. You can see everything is rounded up to the nearest jar, the nearest scoop, the nearest Tetra Pak. And it didn't require blending either because we were using baby food puree. We kept the daytime feeds the same in terms of volume and the feeding rate, and the nighttime feedings the same in terms of volume and the feeding rate. So to really make this an easy process for this family. And as you can see, the ratio did reduce to a 2-to-1 ratio. So they came for their 3-month follow-up in our keto clinic. And you can see that even though we reduced the ratio to 2-to-1, we still had really good therapeutic ketosis, still had further seizure reduction, 1 seizure per day on average, and had improvements in GI tolerance. So mom reported improved stooling, no longer retching or having nausea in the morning or in the evening. They did undergo a fundal application about 1 month before this visit. And you can see the free carnitine normalized as well. So let's transition into talking about using MCT oil with a ketogenic blenderized diet. So many of us are adding MCT oil to increase the ketogenic potential, increase keto production, or to help maintain ketosis on a lower ratio. So our goal of using blenderized ketogenic diets is to really maximize the amount of fruits and vegetables. So we want to have increased ketones and have as much carbohydrate and protein that's allowed. Maybe you want a lower ratio because you want to prevent fewer side effects on higher ratios. And some of us also use MCT oil to help manage bowel regularity. So here's another case study. This is a 6-year-old girl. She has history of HIE, cerebral palsy, and epilepsy. She currently had no clinical seizures. However, her EEG did show some abnormalities, especially during sleep. She was on 1 seizure medication. They did trial steroids, but it wasn't effective, so she was referred to our ketogenic clinic. Current nutrition support, she was on a Blenderized home formula via the G-tube, so no oral feeds. So So again, we admitted this patient to the hospital and started out full calories at a 1-to-1 ratio. And so the ketones listed here are taken in the morning, so they're reflective of the ratio that they were on the day prior. So day 1, on a Monday, we admitted 1-to-1 ratio. Ketones in the morning on Tuesday morning were 2.81. So note that this is in milligrams per deciliter, not millimoles per liter. So day 2, we advanced the ratio to 2-to-1. The following morning, the ketones were around 11. So we did want to increase the ratio, but I didn't really want to go past a 3-to-1 ratio because I really wanted to maximize the amount of real food that they were receiving. So we added in an emulsified MCT oil, starting at 10% of calories with the thought process of titrating up with the MCT oil as needed. By day 4, the ketones in the morning were 40. We felt pretty confident in discharging this patient on this regimen. So 3-to-1 ratio, 10% calories from MCT oil. This is an example of what her ketogenic blend recipe looked like. So when I do Blenderized diets, I like to visually think of the volume of food I'm adding. So for instance, I use a rule of thumb, 40 grams of a fruit or vegetable is roughly the equivalent of a 1/4 cup. And for my liquid or more pureed foods, I use 30 grams is equivalent to 30 mLs, rule of thumb. So looking at this recipe, we're giving about 1/2 cup of strawberries, 1/2 cup of green beans, just shy of 1/2 cup of avocado, a tablespoon of sunflower seed butter, 2 cups of almond milk. So we really felt confident that we were providing this child with a good volume of real food. And this was her day feed. So we divided this recipe into 4 separate feeds for the day. And now that we had the emulsified oil at 10% calories, we did have the ability on an outpatient basis, if we wanted to titrate up while reducing the ratio as warranted. All right, so I am going to pass it off to Laura to finish up here.
Great. Thank you, Jessica. So I'm going to start by talking about a super simple way to provide a blenderized feed using baby food. The benefits of this type of plan is it's not going to require a fancy blender because shaking it actually will put it into a mixture. You can use any brand of baby food. So for younger patients on WIC, you can use whatever brand is on the formulary with your state. And this can help kind of reduce the out-of-pocket costs for families. I've done baby food blends using jars, tubs, pouches, keeping in mind that the pouches can give you a lot of variety since they're generally mixed fruits and vegetables. We will talk more about emulsifiers in a few slides, but with this method of blending foods, you likely will not need one because even if you do see some separation, you can easily just shake the mixture again. This is usually not the case when you're using whole foods, which we'll get into, but with baby food, shaking is usually sufficient. The disadvantages to using some baby food is you may have less variety because you're isolated to the baby food options in the patient community. Baby food is generally going to have less fiber compared to whole foods, so if one of the goals in switching to a blenderized feed is constipation relief, then due to the lack of fiber, you may not see as much benefit as a whole food approach. And families should be educated about reading labels closely. Baby food manufacturers often change their ingredients and their product labels, and that's not common knowledge. They don't have to let us know that. And I've unfortunately learned this the hard way. So let's just look at an example of a baby food blenderized recipe to show you how simple this can truly be. This is a 3-to-1 ratio. It's 740 calories with 12 grams of protein and only has 5 ingredients in it. So super, super simple. I chose to use baby food ham, but you can obviously use a variety of protein sources. You could choose 2 protein sources, ham and chicken, for example. Same thing with vegetables. If you want to get more complicated, you could take that 90 grams of butternut squash and you could do a mixture of squash and green beans to kind of give more variety as well. But if your family wants to stick with 5 ingredients a day to reduce measuring time, then that's great, and this is an easy option. So I typically educate families to make a 24-hour batch, but to go ahead and immediately separate the feedings into the individualized feedings and store in the fridge. So that way when it's time to feed the kiddo, you just pull out one feeding, shake it up, and feed. So switching gears here, let's talk about some blenderized diets using just whole foods. Most of the time for my families, I will encourage them to get a really solid blender, like a Vitamix or a Ninja. There's a bazillion other brands as well, but those are just two that commonly come up. And you're generally going to focus on 5 ingredients to create your blend. So focusing on a protein source, so obviously chicken, fish, eggs, ground meats, or beans and legumes if you're doing some type of vegetarian or vegan option. Then you want to choose your carb source. And this is where you can really use a lot of variety if you're using the ketogenic diet exchanges. So you could do group B vegetables or 10% fruit, and while it may only look like one recipe, you actually have a combination of hundreds of different recipes depending on which item they're using from the exchanges. Then you want to make sure you're adding a fiber source. So your fiber source may be your vegetables, or it may be an avocado, which would count as your fat source, or it may be flax or chia, but I really try and focus on at least one type of fiber source. If I can get in 2 fiber sources, even better. And then last, but most importantly, choosing your fats. I aim for 2 different fats in my blends. So if I'm using some olive oil, I like to pair that with avocado, or if I'm using some coconut oil, pairing that with some butter, just trying to mix up the fat for some variety. This is one example of using a relatively simple approach of not that many ingredients, looking at a 3-to-1 ratio and then also at a 4-to-1 ratio. Both of these recipe examples are 810 calories and 15 grams of protein. And the total volume listed here is the total weight of the food. This is not including any liquid added, so you basically just add whatever liquid amount you want to get a total volume. So if you want to get 900 mLs, you add that much liquid to get that. So I haven't included that in this recipe. The nice thing about blenderized diets is you can create very high calorie per ounce mixtures. So if you have a kid that's volume sensitive, you can make these mixtures 50 calories per ounce. You could likely even go higher, which is one real benefit I have found in my practice with some of the volume sensitive kiddos. So blenderized keto, you can do it for vegan and vegetarian. So this is just one example of using different protein sources, so lentils and the sun butter, so that you can work in some of those maybe patients that are following a vegetarian diet by choice or maybe religion. I get this request a lot, is that they come to me and they think they can't do a vegetarian or vegan diet, keto diet, but you can. It just takes a little bit of finagling and tweaking to make sure that the protein sources are adequate, but it definitely can be done. So emulsifiers. So if you have a solution, so when you combine all of these foods and you have all of this fat into your blenderized feed and it's not staying in solution well, I think we've all been there, and I think the original people who started blenderizing keto probably found this out the hard way. The solution will separate. So there are a few ways to combat this obstacle. One is you can do the baby food option, which just requires shaking. Or 2, you can use emulsifiers that will help keep the food in solution better. So I ultimately generally use a sunflower lecithin, which comes in a powder, and then they also have a liquid option. I usually use the powder option because I have found that the liquid option is extremely sticky, and so then making sure that the kiddo gets all of it can be difficult. And the one thing to keep in mind is that sunflower lecithin is also a fat source. So that's kind of a win-win for keto blenderized, because you actually will calculate this into their plan and it contributes fat. So it also, the other point about sunflower lecithin that I like, it's not a ton, but it also does have some choline in it, which can sometimes help with just keeping all their labs and just overall health in check. In terms of how much you should use of sunflower lecithin, there's not an exact science to this, but a good rule of thumb is 1/3 of the combined oils. So when I talk about oils, I'm not talking fats, I'm talking the oil specifically. So I wouldn't count avocado, I wouldn't count butter, I wouldn't necessarily count heavy cream. I'm just counting the grams of olive oil, avocado oil, and so forth. And then I want to use 1/3 of that as an emulsifying agent. You may find you use this 1/3 rule and it's not enough, and the family may come back to you and say, oh, it's not staying in solution very well, and that's okay. Then just add more. So it's a little bit of trial and error here. But here's an example of how the emulsifier math works out. So if I have 17 grams of coconut oil, 17 grams of olive oil, that's 34 grams of oil. And then if I divide that by 3, I'm getting 11.3. So I'm going to suggest to this family to add 11 grams of lecithin to the mixture. And then I will tell them, hey, follow up with me in a few days after you make this. Let me know if it's mixing well. So switching gears here a little bit, but in the booklet that Jessica and Lindsay and I worked on, we have some superfood combinations and superfood suggestions in ways to get a big bang for your nutrition buck in these blenderized feeds. So superfoods can be your best friend in terms of carnitine, which is something that I am finding, quite a few deficiencies in depending on the kiddo. And I have a lot of families that don't want to use supplemental carnitine. So either they've tried the carnitine tablets or the carnitine liquid and the kid had a bad response to it, or they just want to try something more natural. So I'll try and work in some natural, more bioavailable sources of the superfoods in terms of the ground lamb and the ground beef. The other thing I sometimes will use is a carnitine powder in these situations. It seems that sometimes the kids tolerate the powder, over-the-counter powder versus the prescription strength tablets and liquids for some reason. Antioxidants, of course, we could go over a whole host of why we want to get antioxidants into our diet, but for keto, we always think that, oh, fruits and vegetables is where we get our antioxidants, and we quickly can forget that they can come from dark chocolate, beans, and sunflower butter. And I've never had a family mad when I suggested adding some dark chocolate into the blenderized feeds. So usually people are pretty on board with that. And then the third category is trying to get in more calcium and vitamin D to reduce the reliance on supplements. I don't like for patients to come to me and say, oh, we're going to do a ketogenic diet, and then I hand them 14 supplements to take in terms of a multivitamin, a calcium, and carnitine. So I really try and get as many of those nutrients into the food choices as possible. So if I have a kid who needs more calcium, I will use nut-based milks as their liquid because I can get quite a bit of calcium in 8 to 16 ounces. You can also work low-carb yogurts in or unsweetened kefir. But of course, those are going to have protein and some carbohydrates in them, while the unsweetened nut milks are pretty minimal with only 1 gram of protein, about 30 calories. So you can usually get more calcium for your calories. And then the omega-3s. So these can really help with, getting in the DHA and ARAs and ALA. This particular example works in 3 different sources of omega-3s from the spinach, flaxseed, and walnut oil. So that's 50% of the ingredients in this are omega-3 sources. So pretty easy to do to at least get 1 in to every blenderized feed. So that leads us to the end of this webinar. I hope you guys, everybody learned something. Let's go over just some general tips and conclusions, and then we'll open it up to Q&A. Ultimately, try to avoid making changes to any vitamin mineral supplements at the same time you are adjusting your blend. So really focus on 1 change at a time. So if you're starting a kid on a blenderized feed, get them on their goal blenderized feed, and then work on adding vitamin mineral supplements last. That way if the kid is having a reaction to the blenderized food or the supplement. So really just try and focus, again, one change at a time. Be aware of your hospital's policy on blenderized diets. For example, at MUSC here in South Carolina, we do not blenderize feeds at the hospital. We don't have the equipment, we don't have the staff training. So we will, though, allow families to bring in their blenderized feeds to use, or they can bring in a blender and blend in their room. We will not provide a blender, though, but we will allow them to blend with their blender in their room. They do have to sign a waiver, and ultimately families may be fine with that. Other families will just say, hey, when we come into the hospital, can we just use a formula? So in that case, I have a backup plan where we're just using a standardized keto formula for their hospital stay. But every hospital may be different. And so the questions you need to ask are, what would your hospital do for a blenderized feed? And, you know, if there's no protocol or policy in place, should somebody go ahead and start working on making one? Keep in mind the previous feeding method. So, you know, if you have a kid who's on boluses during the day and continuous overnight, you know, a lot of these pumps that provide slow feeding infusions may not work with a blenderized feed. It depends on the viscosity of the formula. The other thing to keep in mind, though, sometimes depending on the DME, is if you put too thick of a formula into the pump and they find out about it, they may not, they may limit the warranty of the pump. So you just have to be careful with how thick is your feed, should it be going through a pump. I ultimately would say 90% of my blenderized kids are all bolus fed, and it works out great. They tolerate it fine. I do have a few that do feeding pumps, but they definitely are my kids who are on thinner feeds. Making large batches is great. So I have most of my families they'll take Sunday or Saturday, and they will spend the day blending food and really stockpiling for the next 1 or 2 weeks. And that has really encouraged success and decreased burnout. And then, of course, consider various fluid options. Lindsay mentioned bone broth. You know, if you have a family that wants to use that. I mentioned the nut-based milks. You have a lot of different options for your liquid, so don't forget about that option, potentially also contributing nutrition. So in conclusion, the assessment of food allergies and intolerances should occur before starting a medical ketogenic diet. This eliminates the possibility of surprises as you initiate your plan. So many families are looking for a more whole food-based option for their kiddos. If your practice is anything like mine, I generally get these types of requests on a weekly basis. So really try and work with your families on how to incorporate foods into their feeding plan to help with various side effects. Even if it's something as simply an avocado to help with constipation, it can make a huge difference. Be sure to be aware of any safe food handling practices are maintained. In the back of the booklet, there is a lot more information on safe food handling, so I encourage you to check that out as a reference. And never ever think of keto as a one-size approach. I think we all know this by now being ketogenic dietitians, but really with Blenderized, I don't have a single family following the same plan. It's 100% individualized to that child, and families really like that. So thank you all, and I'm going to hand it back over to Ellen for question and answer.
All right. Thank you very much, Laura and Jessica and Lindsay, for this fantastic presentation. I know that we have had some questions that have come in. There is the references for all of you guys, and they are in the slides as well. For those of you who have a phone and want to scan the QR code to do the survey, we would appreciate your feedback. Otherwise, you can type in the link that is on the screen, or it will also come up as we close out the webinar. But I know I do want to get started with the questions. So the first question, any tips from you guys on how to get the prescription vitamins covered by insurance?
I can try to answer that since that was my slide. In my experience, it really depends on your state. So some state Medicaids will cover supplements and others won't. So if it's a patient on state insurance, I would check with your state. Most private insurances, I don't have any luck with getting those covered for those patients. Sometimes it's an issue of the insurance will cover it, but then it's hard to find a pharmacy that will get it for you. So make sure that that's not the issue. And then I've also utilized our social worker in these instances to access funding for patients that maybe need help with covering supplements. They often know funding, funds that would qualify for that type of thing. That would be my answer. I don't know if anyone has anything to add.
I'll just add, in the state of California, we can get some of those comprehensive multivitamins covered by our state insurances. And what we found is that we have to do a special reimbursement code. I don't know, it's like a Z5999 code, so it's different than trying to submit for a formula. So maybe try to find a case manager that you work really well with to kind of investigate some of those nuances.
Okay, thanks, guys. Laura, any tips on where people would find sunflower lecithin? Is it in your basic grocery store, or where would people go to find that?
Yeah, I usually have people ordering on Amazon. I've found it, though, at Whole Foods and Earth Fare. I don't know if those are specific to the southeast of the United States, but Amazon definitely has it.
Okay. Jessica and Lindsay, do you guys get it anywhere else?
I actually have not used it, and I'm excited to use it now after this presentation. But I think Amazon is what most families are used to.
Yeah, that's where we got it from when we did the book. So in terms of thinning out blends and trying to determine how thick or thin they need to be with feeding pumps, how do you guys determine that? Is there any sort of viscosity test that you do or anything like that?
So this may not be like an official test, but generally what I do is I will test the flow rate. So I'll run the pump into an empty measuring container for 30 minutes to an hour and see if the volume pumped compares to the rate. So I'll basically put like 60 mLs I'll tell the family, to put 60 mLs of the Blenderized feed in, we'll set the pump at 60 mLs an hour, did it all go through, and how close was it? If it's pretty accurate, then I haven't had any issues with pump blowout or anything like that. And if it's too thick, you'll know because after the hour, maybe only like 40 mLs was infused. So that would mean it was too thick and you got to find a different way.
Okay. Jessica, I think you, I know that you've done a lot with Blenderized feeds in general, and anybody else can feel free to jump in on this too. Do you guys think that there's any issues with feeding probiotic foods when mixed into Blenderized feeds? Would they lose their efficacy? Any opinions on this?
Yeah, I mean, I don't really have an opinion about that. That's a good question. I usually just have my families, blend up a day's batch. Sometimes they freeze it, but I haven't done any testing to see or any research to see if any of those probiotic foods. I mean, we include them, but other than that, I haven't delved in deeper than that.
Anybody else have an opinion on that one?
Yeah, that's a great question. I do not have an answer.
And it looks like, Ellen, this question was specifically about freezing probiotics.
Yeah.
Sorry, when you asked it, you said feeding.
Oh, I thought I said freezing.
I know some. I don't know the answer to that, but I know there's some probiotics that come to be stored in the freezer, so I would think those would be fine. I would just, if they're typically stored in the refrigerator, I would add them at the time of offering the blend and not freeze them, but that's just strictly, I haven't read any articles to know the answer.
Okay. And then the last question, just checking serum calcium levels. Do you guys do anything special with the serum calcium level to make sure, or check an ionized calcium, or just the serum calcium level is adequate enough for these patients on blend with allergies?
I don't use serum calcium as a measure of bone health, so I make sure that they're getting, and at least in the U.S. we use the DRI. I make sure that the patient's meeting that, and then with our patients that are over 5 at our center, we do yearly bone density scans to check the status of their bones.
Yeah, I'm like Lindsay. I just use the DRI, the analysis of their blend to reach their goal. I think it's, 80 or 90% of your calcium should be in bone and not your blood. So typically your body tightly controls serum calcium. If there's any abnormalities with serum calcium, I feel like it's outside my scope. I usually reach out to endo to help manage.
Okay. So you would recommend following up with endocrinology?
That's what I would do.
Okay. Wonderful. And with that, we are a little bit over time, so I apologize for that, everyone. And any further questions that come in, we can email out to the panel and have them answer that. If everybody could please answer the survey, I would appreciate it, and I know our speakers would appreciate any feedback. And thank you all for participating in the webinar. Thank you to Lindsay, Jessica, and Laura for this wonderful presentation today. And thank you, everybody, for joining again. Have a great day, everyone.